What if the reason you keep failing to break your bad habits has nothing to do with willpower, discipline, or motivation? What if the entire approach you've been taught is scientifically backwards? Because here's what the data on human behavior actually shows: massive, dramatic change almost never sticks. And yet, that's exactly what most people attempt. They wake up one day and decide they're going to overhaul their entire life in a single weekend. New diet, new workout, new morning routine, all at once. And for about 4 days, maybe 5, it works. Then they crash. They go right back to where they started, usually feeling worse than before. But there's a different way. A way that's been quietly producing extraordinary results for decades. It comes from Japan, and it's called Kaizen. The word Kaizen is made up of 2 Japanese characters, Kai, meaning change, and Zen, meaning good. Together, they translate loosely to continuous improvement. But don't let the simplicity of that phrase fool you. What sits underneath it is one of the most powerful frameworks for behavioral change ever developed, and once you understand how it works with the brain rather than against it, you'll never look at habit formation the same way again. Now, to really understand why Kaizen works, we need to take a short trip inside your brain. Because your brain is not just a thinking machine. It's primarily a threat detection machine. Deep inside the brain sits a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala, and its entire job is to scan your environment for danger and keep you alive. Here's what most people don't realize: the amygdala responds to psychological threats the same way it responds to physical ones. So when you decide you're going to completely transform your habits starting Monday, your brain doesn't see ambition. It sees a threat. It sees massive, unfamiliar change. And it fires off a stress response that quietly, almost invisibly, begins working against you. This is why big resolutions create anxiety. This is why you find yourself procrastinating on things you genuinely want to do. Your own brain is pumping the brakes. Kaizen sidesteps this entirely. The philosophy is built around one deceptively simple idea: make the change so small that the brain doesn't notice it as a threat. And when the brain doesn't register a threat, the amygdala stays quiet. The prefrontal cortex, the rational, creative, goal-oriented part of your brain, stays in the driver's seat. And that's where lasting change actually gets made. Here's a story that puts this into sharp focus. After World War II, Japan was in ruins. Its manufacturing industry was decimated, its workforce was demoralized, and the country needed to rebuild fast. An American management consultant named W. Edwards Deming went to Japan and introduced a philosophy to Japanese manufacturing teams that changed everything: the idea of making small, incremental improvements every single day rather than waiting for massive breakthroughs. Japanese companies, Toyota in particular, adopted this thinking so deeply that it became cultural. Workers on the factory floor weren't just expected to do their jobs. They were expected to observe, question, and improve their process by even the tiniest amount, every single day. The results were staggering. Toyota didn't become one of the greatest manufacturers in history because of one giant revolution. It became great through 10,000 tiny ones. And here's where it gets fascinating for human behavior. Because the same principle that rebuilt Japan's industrial economy is the exact same principle that rewires the human brain. Neuroscience has a phrase for this: neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you repeat a small behavior, even something as minor as choosing water over soda at lunch, the neural pathway associated with that behavior gets slightly stronger. Do it enough times, and that pathway becomes the default. The habit becomes automatic. And all of it happened without the white-knuckling, without the willpower battles, without the inevitable crash that follows most big attempts at change. So let's talk about what Kaizen actually looks like in practice, because this is where the philosophy moves from theory into your real life. The first principle is what practitioners call the 1% rule. Instead of trying to change everything at once, ask yourself, what is 1% better than what I did yesterday? Just 1%. If you want to get fit and you currently do 0 exercise, don't sign up for a 6-day-a-week program. Put on your shoes and walk to the end of your street. That's it. If you want to read more and you currently read nothing, read 1 page tonight. Not a chapter. 1 page. This sounds almost embarrassingly small, but that's exactly the point. You're not trying to impress anyone with the size of the change. You're trying to make the change sustainable enough that you'll still be doing it 90 days from now. The second principle of Kaizen is the practice of asking small questions. This one is subtle but enormously powerful. Your brain responds differently to big questions versus small ones. If you ask yourself, how do I completely eliminate my sugar addiction? Your brain often gets overwhelmed and shuts down creatively. But if you ask, what is one tiny thing I could do today that would reduce my sugar intake by just a little? Your brain actually starts working. It starts problem solving. Small questions create psychological safety, and in that safety, real creativity and momentum emerge. Start asking yourself small questions about your habits. Not why can't I stop scrolling at night? But what is one small thing I could put between me and my phone at bedtime? The brain opens up. Solutions appear. And because the solutions are small, you actually do them. The third principle is environmental design through incremental adjustments. Most habits don't live in your mind, they live in your environment. You don't reach for the chips because you have weak willpower. You reach for the chips because the chips are at eye level in the cabinet and fruit requires washing. Kaizen applied to your environment doesn't mean redesigning your entire home on a Saturday. It means making one small environmental shift this week. Move the chips to a high shelf. Put a bowl of apples on the counter. That's it. One shift. Give it a week. Then make another one. Over the course of 2 or 3 months, your environment quietly becomes one that supports who you're trying to become, without you ever going through one exhausting overhaul. Now, there's a psychological phenomenon that Kaizen naturally triggers, and it's worth understanding because it becomes a kind of secret engine for your progress. It's called the identity shift. James Clear wrote about this in the context of habit formation. Every small action you take is a vote for the type of person you believe yourself to be. When you take a 2-minute walk instead of sitting on the couch, you cast a vote for being someone who moves their body. Do it again tomorrow, another vote. Do it for 30 days, and something remarkable happens. You no longer say, I'm trying to become a fit person. You say, I'm the kind of person who exercises. The identity changes. And once the identity changes, the habits that flow from that identity become far easier to maintain, because now they're consistent with who you believe you are. This is why Kaizen is so much more than a productivity trick. It's a framework for identity reconstruction, done slowly enough that your brain never resists it. Let's also address something that most people get wrong about breaking bad habits specifically. The research on behavioral change shows that you cannot simply remove a bad habit. The neural pathway that was built through repetition doesn't disappear. It gets quieter, yes, but it remains. This is why relapse is so common. The old pathway is still there, waiting to be reactivated by stress or boredom or a familiar environment. What Kaizen helps you do is not erase the old pathway, but build a new one that becomes so strong, so well-worn, that the old one simply becomes less traveled. You're not fighting the old habit. You're outbuilding it. One small, consistent repetition at a time. Think of it like 2 paths through a forest. The bad habit is a wide, well-worn trail that you've walked 1,000 times. It's easy, it's familiar, it's automatic. The new habit is a thin line through the undergrowth, barely visible. Every time you choose the new behavior, you take one step down that thin line. You don't hack away the old trail with a machete. You just keep walking the new one, day after day, until it becomes the obvious path. Until it becomes the one that feels easy and automatic. There's one more element of Kaizen worth sitting with, and it might be the most important one. It's the philosophy's relationship with failure. In Western approaches to self-improvement, failure is often catastrophic. You miss one workout and the whole program falls apart. You eat one cookie and the diet is over. You break the streak and something in your brain says, well, that's done. But in the Kaizen tradition, small failures are not catastrophes, they are data. They are information. They are part of the process. The question is never, did I fail? The question is always, what small adjustment can I make to do 1% better tomorrow? This reframe is enormously liberating. It removes the shame spiral that derails most attempts at change and replaces it with curiosity and forward motion. So here's where all of this lands. If you have a bad habit you've been trying to break, whether it's doom scrolling, emotional eating, hitting snooze every morning, spending beyond your means, or any of the dozen other patterns that feel bigger than you, the answer is probably not more willpower. The answer is probably smaller actions. Actions so small your brain forgets to be afraid of them. Actions so small they feel almost silly. Because silly and consistent will always, always beat ambitious and abandoned. The Japanese didn't rebuild one of the most productive economies in the world by being more intense. They did it by being more patient. By trusting that small, daily improvement compounds into something extraordinary over time. And your brain, your habits, your life, they operate by exactly the same laws. Pick one habit. Just one. And ask yourself, what is the smallest possible version of the change I want to make? Not the most impressive version. The most sustainable one. Start there. Do it tomorrow. Then do it again. And trust the compound interest of tiny, consistent action to do what willpower alone never could. That's the Kaizen way.